Welcome to Let's Go Dutch. I'm Veronica Lewis, and today we're in New Amsterdam, New York City.
I'm gonna travel the world. I'm gonna go where the Dutch have been, and I'm gonna share it with you, my friends. Let's go Dutch. Let's go Dutch. Let's go Dutch.
Although there's not much left of Dutch New Amsterdam, we'll see if we can find some semblance of New York City's real founding fathers hidden amongst the skyscrapers. So put on your clogs and let's go Dutch. The year was 1609. Sailing for the Dutch aboard the Half Moon, Henry Hudson sailed up the river that now bears his name. In 1625, the Dutch sent colonists to the New World, and a year later, Peter Minuit purchased the island of Manhattan for 60 guilders, or about $24. Although the Indians really didn't understand what transpired, this was Europe's first business deal. The Spanish, British, and Portuguese would have just taken the land by force. Hudson was an Englishman working for the Dutch East India Company. He reported back to them of his findings: a great harbor, deep enough for their ships, and with several islands of various sizes. His mission to find the westerly route to India failed, but it wasn't entirely a failure. Hudson sailed aboard the Dutch ship de Halve Maan, the Half Moon. They departed from Amsterdam by the Schreierstoren. On the tower is a plaque commemorating Hudson's historic journey. This column commemorates the original Dutch settlement. As you can see, it's all in Dutch. Now, we could go over to the English side, but it would be a lot more fun to have Billy Eric translate it for us. Billy Eric, kom je bij me alstublieft? That means, come hither, please.
Hallo liefde. Dag iedereen. Okay, this is basically saying that on April 22nd of 1625, the Dutch West India Company of Amsterdam financed the building of Fort Amsterdam and also 10 farms. And it also makes mention of the sale of Manhattan Island in 1626 and how this became the foundation of New York City.
Wel goed. But how do we know you read that and didn't just go to the English side?
Because I have a little Dutch dictionary in my pocket.
Nice try.
Because I am standing on the Dutch side and therefore can't see the English side.
He's right.
Now let me show you. Up on top of the flagpole we have the coat of arms of New Amsterdam. We have the sails of a Dutch windmill, and the beavers represent the pelts they were trading, and also flour barrels. The Dutch just love flowers.
Let's head over there, where Fort Amsterdam once stood. This building sits on the site of the original Fort Amsterdam. It's now the Museum of the American Indian, and before that, it was a customs house. Battery Park, across from here, didn't exist in Dutch times. In the 19th century, landfill enlarged parts of the island, which although this happened long after the Dutch, it's quite fitting really, since the Dutch are famous for reclaiming land from the sea. The tip of Manhattan was somewhere around here. That means I could be in the river right now. Help, help! Ik zwem niet! Whew, close call. Okay, I lied. I really can swim. Continuing along the trail, we're going to follow along the eastern edge that made up New Amsterdam. We're at the corner of Pearl and Whitehall Streets. This was the eastern corner of New Amsterdam in the 1600s. All that beyond was landfill that came later. The water's edge came up to here at Pearl Street. It's named Pearl Street for the oysters found abundantly here. Billy Eric, you got a little tidbit to share?
Ja, zeker. Back in 1632, a Jewish merchant named Abraham van Vee opened up an oyster bar here along Pearl Street. It was called Oyster Vase. And did you know this was the origin of the phrase oy vey? Guys would come home smelling of oysters. The wives would get one whiff and go, oy vey! And that meant you spent the whole night at Oyster Vase and now you come home looking for a happy ending.
This area of Pearl Street is the site of the Dutch Stadhuis, the town hall. In 1641, William Kieft built a tavern for his friends so they would have a place to hang. It became the Stadhuis in 1653. Next door was another tavern, the Lovelace Tavern, which became the second Stadhuis in 1670. Excavation done in the 1970s discovered the foundation of the Lovelace Tavern. They also found a water cistern that was built by a wealthy family with a house on Pearl Street. Look for the yellow stones in the pavement, which outline the original Stadhuis, and the gray bricks, which outline the tavern. Right across from the Stadhuis site is this little lane called Coenties Alley. Strange name, Coenties.
Coenties Alley, or Coantjessteeg as it was known in Dutch times, led to the property of Conrad ten Eyck and his lovely wife Antje. Now, if we take the CO from Conrad and we add Antje, we get Coantje. And this was later anglicized into Coenties. Speaking of anglicized, the British called this Bridge Street, yet there's no bridge in sight.
He's right. No bridge in sight. But if we follow Bridge Street on the map, we see it leads to a bridge over the Herengracht, the Gentleman's Canal.
This street here is Broad Street, which was the Herengracht Canal in Dutch times. Here at the intersection with Bridge Street, there was indeed a bridge going over the canal.
Remember the beaver on the New Amsterdam coat of arms? Well, look at the map. That's Beaver Street. And as you can see, there was a stream there. No doubt, much beaver lurking about. So important was this critter that the proposed seal of New Amsterdam features the beaver prominently, along with the crosses from Amsterdam's coat of arms.
Of course the Dutch love the beaver. They build dams. Why, they've even built several in Holland. Amsterdam, Rotterdam, Volendam, Edam. Something just doesn't seem quite right about that. Edam.
Look at this wide street here, heading north from Fort Amsterdam. It was called Herenstraat, the Gentleman's Street. We know it now as Broadway. This street we know now as Stone Street. But in 1660, it was called Brouwersstraat, which means Brewer Street. Eén bier, alstublieft. Wel, Prost! It became Stone Street after being amongst the first to get cobblestones. This is the famous Wall Street. It was the northern boundary of New Amsterdam. In Dutch times, there really was a wall here. The wall ran the length from east to west. Walking along Wall Street today, you can see remnants of the wooden wall from 1653 in the pavement. Looking at the line of giant buildings, it kind of looks like there's still a wall here. Maybe if the walls were this huge, we'd still be New Amsterdam and speaking Dutch. Ik geloof het niet. Wij spreken Nederlands. While the Dutch built the wall to keep out invaders, the British invaded by sea. Outgunned, the city was surrendered to the British without a shot being fired. And in 1664, New Amsterdam was renamed for the Duke of York. Of course, Wall Street now is home of the American Stock Exchange. However, the world's first publicly traded stock was in Amsterdam back in 1602. In 1638, stocks were being privately traded here in New Amsterdam. Although they were later filled in, the Dutch carved slips into the island on the eastern side for ships to dock. All that's left now are a handful of streets with slip in the name. North of the wall was a wide street cutting into the farmland and wilderness. We know it now as Bowery. The name conjures up images of Skid Row and a time when the Lower East Side was run down and dangerous. The name really stems from the Old Dutch word for farm, Bowery. The street connected the farms with the southeastern docks of New Amsterdam. Speaking of farms, the biggest farm plot was owned by Peter Stuyvesant, the governor of New Amsterdam. The Stuyvesant family had a chapel at what is now St. Mark's in the Bowery at 2nd Avenue and 10th Street. Amidst the grid of streets in this area is this lane running at an angle. This was a narrow lane on Stuyvesant's farm, and in 1783, Stuyvesant's great-grandson widened it and named it Stuyvesant Street. At the northern end where it connects with 3rd Avenue, there's a little garden commemorating the Stuyvesant farm. Hey, here's a little tidbit of info. From its early beginnings as a Dutch city, New Amsterdam was a mix of ethnicities and modeled after the same tolerance of Old Amsterdam. When the British took the city, they allowed the Dutch tolerance and melting pot atmosphere to continue, making New York City a unique city amongst the rest of Britain's New England colonies. It's not just in the 20th century that Manhattan became the melting pot as we know it today. When you think of slavery, New York City is hardly on the map. But in 1652, the Dutch brought 11 slaves here. All European powers were guilty of slavery, but the Dutch were different. The slaves in New Amsterdam were afforded rights, such as being married in church and having their children baptized. And they had rights in court against whites, and they could legally sign documents. They could even moonlight for pay. there's a law on the books from 1652 assuring these rights. When the British took New Amsterdam, these rights were taken away and the slaves were considered property. And by the way, when New Amsterdam was taken, the Dutch freed all the slaves. In the West Village is a street called Minetta Lane. Underneath the street sits Minetta Brook, a narrow river, which in Dutch times was very much above ground. The area around Minetta Brook were farm plots and were owned by freed slaves. Did I hear that correctly? May I see the script, please? The Dutch gave the plots to freed slaves. This little snaking street going south connected their farms to the southern parts of New Amsterdam. The English later on referred to the street as the Negroes' Causeway. On Governor's Island, off the southern tip of Manhattan. It was here that the Dutch actually settled first. I think they were afraid of the bigger wild island. Yeah, it's wild, a real jungle out here. There's of course nothing left from the 17th century. But there is, however, a whole lot of colonial charm. And with the New York skyline as your backdrop, it makes for a wonderful ride. The year was 1624 or so. The Dutch settlers, having ridden around the small island many times, kept eyeing the bigger island. Perhaps venturous souls ventured across the harbor in search of some eten and came back saying,
We vonden er geen gevaarlijk. We zagen er heel konijnen en varken en zelfs tomaten. Je kunt hier zeker een lekker spekslaan tomaatbroodje maken.
So they packed up their dingin, got in their dinghy, and moved across the harbor.
And we owe the Dutch great thanks for that. Can you imagine if Governor's Island with a big apple? All squashed together like sardines.
Every now and then, Henry Hudson's ship, de Halve Maan, makes an appearance on the Hudson. A ghost ship, perhaps? Actually, it's a replica of the original Half Moon. Although the Dutch foundation is long gone and skyscrapers erased much of the old world European character, it's still possible to find some Dutch revival architecture mixed in amongst the giants if you look close enough. Here's a smidgen from around the city. It almost looks like Amsterdam. of this riding around has gotten this major awfully hungry. What say we set out in search of some eats? Manhattan has an abundance of ethnic restaurants, with over 58 countries represented. But no Dutch. So when it comes to eating in Manhattan, better to think like a seafaring Dutchman and sample what the world has to offer. Andalusian, si. French, oui. Italiano, prego. Russian, da. Brazilian, obrigado. Chilean, si. Indonesian, does that count as Dutch? Indonesia was a Dutch colony from 1602 to 1949. Food in Middle-Age Europe was quite bland, and because there was no refrigeration, food would spoil as days went by. The Europeans sought routes to the Far East and their abundance of exotic spices to make the food more edible. Just like old Amsterdam, New Amsterdam is a city full of museums. I want to show you two of them, but first, a word of the day is in order. The word of the day is prachtig. It means wonderful, gorgeous, splendid, superb. Here's a way you can use the word prachtig. The Frick Collection, a great museum with 3 prachtig vermeers. Or how about this? The Metropolitan Museum, a classical building housing a prachtig collection of Dutch and Flemish masters. I don't want you to think I walk around with cheese in my pockets. I don't have any pockets. But I just happen to have some aged Gouda on me. Those of you who have been following our show should know how Gouda is pronounced. Have you been practicing? Billy Eric, count them in.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Gouda.
You know what goes Gouda with Gouda?
I think you said that backwards.
You know what goes Gouda with Gouda?
Een biertje.
Ja, zeker.
Dank u wel. He's right. They go perfect together. It all started with a job offer. The Dutch hired an English ship captain named Henry Hudson to find a northern passage to the east. He departed from Amsterdam, a city brimming with the wealth of its golden age. He crossed the Atlantic and stumbled onto an island that would become New Amsterdam. The ties with Holland still run deep. You can see reminders all around town, in the street names and neighborhoods, or the city seal with its windmill, beavers, Indian, and Dutchman. It's not surprising this tiny powerhouse in the northwestern corner of Europe would establish an equally tiny city that would blossom into a powerhouse in its own right. Crossing the famous Brooklyn Bridge takes you to what was then known as Brooklyn, Broken Land. There you'll find places like Konijneneiland, Coney Island, and Bosvik, Bushwick. The Dutch left behind a city of diversity and color, and it all started here at the tip of Manhattan, New Amsterdam. Well, that's all the time we have. I hope you've enjoyed our ride through New Amsterdam. I'm your host, Veronica Lewis. Join us again next time on Let's Go Dutch as we explore more of Holland and beyond. Tot ziens!